Amy Collins stepped off the transport ship and looked around at the massive space station. Zenith 7 stretched out in every direction, a city floating in the darkness of space. She had traveled for 3 weeks to get here, leaving Earth behind for the first time in her 22 years of life. Her hands shook a little as she picked up her single bag and walked toward the entrance. The Galactic Combat Academy took up half of the station. It was the most respected military school in known space, training soldiers from dozens of alien worlds. Amy had scored high enough on the entrance exams to earn humanity's only seat this year. 3,000 humans had tried. Only she had made it. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt terrified. The other cadets towered over her. Some had 4 arms. Others had scales or fur or skin that changed colors. A few floated instead of walked. Amy kept her eyes forward and tried not to stare. She had studied alien species for months, but seeing them in person was different. They were real, and they were everywhere. An instructor met her at the registration desk. His name was Paul Vance, and he was from a species called the Xelnoth. He stood nearly 8 feet tall with gray skin and eyes that glowed faintly yellow. When he looked at Amy, his face showed nothing. "Cadet Collins," he said. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "You are the human." "Yes, sir," Amy replied. "You are small." "Yes, sir. Most of your kind are small. This will be difficult for you." Amy did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Paul Vance handed her a data pad with her schedule and room assignment. He did not welcome her. He simply pointed down a hallway and told her to report to orientation in 1 hour. Her room was tiny, just big enough for a bed and a desk. The walls were bare metal, and the single window looked out at the endless stars. Amy sat on the bed and wondered if she had made a mistake. Back on Earth, she had been strong and fast and smart. Here, she was the smallest person in every room, but she had not come all this way to give up on the first day. The first 3 months went better than Amy expected. She learned to use alien weapons that fired energy instead of bullets. She studied tactics for fighting in zero gravity. She ran obstacle courses designed for species with different body types. It was hard, but she kept up. The other cadets mostly ignored her. They formed groups based on their homeworld, speaking languages Amy could not understand. She ate alone in the cafeteria and studied alone in her room. Sometimes she felt invisible. Other times she felt like everyone was watching her, waiting for her to fail. Then Commandant Vrel made an announcement that changed everything. All 300 cadets gathered in the main hall. Commandant Vrel was from a species Amy had never seen before. She was short and covered in blue feathers, but her voice carried authority that made everyone stand straighter. "The Karvesh trial begins in 6 weeks," she said. "This is the test that will determine who stays and who goes home. You will each be assigned a pod of 5 Karvesh cubs. Your task is to train them for combat operations. Those who succeed will continue their education here. Those who fail will be dismissed." The hall filled with nervous whispers. Amy pulled up information about the Karvesh on her data pad. They were predators, about the size of large earth cats, with 6 legs and sharp teeth. They could communicate with each other through some kind of mental connection. The file said they were dangerous and unpredictable. The file also said that 92% of cadets failed the Karvesh trial. Amy felt her stomach twist into a knot. The next day, all the cadets were taken to see the training arena. It was a huge circular room with high walls and a dirt floor. Around the edges were cages, and in each cage were 5 Karvesh cubs. Amy walked slowly along the cages, looking at the creatures inside. They were bigger than she expected, each one probably weighing 60 or 70 pounds. Their fur was dark, gray with black stripes, and their eyes were bright green. Chains connected their collars to the cage walls. One cub watched Amy as she passed. It was smaller than the others, maybe the youngest of the group. Its ears were flat against its head, and it made a low sound that might have been a growl or might have been something else. Amy stopped and looked back at it. The cub did not look away. Paul Vance appeared beside her. "That is your assigned pod," he said, pointing at the cage. "You have 6 weeks to break them. Make them obey. Make them fight when you command. If you cannot do this, you will fail. How do we break them? Amy asked. Paul Vance gestured to a table covered with equipment, shock collars, pain sticks, restraints. Most cadets use these. Some try other methods. It does not matter how you do it, only that it works. Amy looked at the tools, then back at the cubs. They were young, probably less than a year old. Their eyes held fear and anger in equal measure. What happens to them after the trial? She asked. The ones that survive are returned to their homeworld, Paul Vance said. The ones that do not survive are disposed of. Cubs die during this? Sometimes. They fight back. Accidents happen. Paul Vance walked away. Amy stood there for a long time, watching the 5 cubs in the cage. The smallest one still watched her. The others huddled together in the back corner. Over the next week, Amy watched the other cadets begin their training. Most of them used the shock collars right away, punishing the cubs whenever they did not obey. The cubs fought back hard. Amy saw 3 cadets get sent to the medical bay with deep scratches and bite wounds. The sounds from the training arena were terrible. Cubs crying out in pain, cadets shouting commands. The crack of pain sticks against flesh. Amy could not bring herself to enter the arena. Instead, she stood outside the cage and watched her assigned pod. She studied how they moved, how they interacted with each other. The smallest one always ate last. The biggest one stood guard while the others slept. One of them seemed clever, always testing the chains to find weak points. After a week, Paul Vance found her outside the cage again. "Cadet Collins, you have not begun training," he said. "No, sir," Amy replied. "You are wasting time. The trial is in 5 weeks." "Yes, sir." "You will fail if you do not start." Amy looked at the instructor, then at the cubs. "Maybe I will, sir." Paul Vance shook his head and walked away. Amy heard him tell another instructor that the human would wash out before the month ended. He sounded certain about it, but Amy did not leave. She came back the next day and the day after that. She sat outside the cage and watched the cubs. She started to notice patterns in their behavior. The sounds they made had meaning. Different tones meant different things. She also noticed something else. The cubs were not mindless animals. They had personalities. They communicated. They cared about each other. And they were suffering. Amy made a decision that night. She would not use the shock collars or the pain sticks. She would not break them. Instead, she would try something different. Something that might fail completely. She would try to understand them. Amy started bringing her food to the training arena. The academy gave each cadet 3 meal rations per day, usually some kind of protein bar and dried fruit that tasted like cardboard. Amy took her lunch and sat down about 10 feet from the cage where her 5 cubs lived. She did not try to feed them. She did not talk to them. She just sat there and ate her food slowly, letting them see her. The first day, the cubs ignored her completely. They stayed in their corner, pressed together in a tight group. Only the smallest one looked at her occasionally, those bright green eyes watching every move Amy made. The second day was the same. And the third, other cadets passed by and laughed at her. One of them, a tall alien with blue skin named Kyle Porter, stopped to watch. "You are doing it wrong," he said. "You need to show them who is in charge." "Maybe," Amy said. "I got my cubs to sit on command yesterday," Kyle said proudly. He showed Amy the shock collar remote on his belt. 3 days of training and they are already learning. Amy looked at the burns on Kyle's arms where his cubs had fought back. "That is good," she said, even though she did not think it was good at all. By the end of week 2, Amy had started to notice changes. The cubs did not press themselves into the corner anymore when she arrived. They stayed where they were, but they watched her. All 5 of them now tracked her movements. The smallest one was the bravest. It crept closer to the front of the cage each day, stopping a few feet back from the bars. Amy started thinking of it as Scout, though she did not say the name out loud. One afternoon, Amy was humming while she ate. It was an old song her father taught her when she was little, something about mountains and rivers. She was not paying attention to the cubs, just humming to herself because the training arena was too quiet without it. Scout made a sound. Amy stopped humming and looked up. Scout stood at the front of the cage now, head tilted to one side. Amy hummed again, just a few notes. Scout made another sound different from the first one. It was not words. It was not even close to human language. But it was communication. Amy's heart beat faster. She hummed again, the same notes. Scout responded with the same sound as before. Amy tried different notes. Scout made different sounds. They were talking, sort of. Over the next few days, Amy spent hours learning the sounds the cubs made. She brought a small recording device and captured hundreds of different vocalizations. Each cub had its own voice, its own patterns. The biggest one, the protector of the group, used deep rumbling sounds. The quickest one made sharp chirping noises. The clever one who tested the chains used varying pitches that sounded almost like questions. Scout used soft, careful sounds that seemed to ask if things were safe. Amy started responding to them in their own language. When Scout made its questioning sound, Amy hummed low and steady, trying to sound calm. When the protective one rumbled a warning, Amy backed away and gave it space. When the clever one seemed bored, Amy would do something interesting like juggle her food containers or move in unusual ways. She was not training them. She was communicating with them. Paul Vance came by during week 3. He stood behind Amy for several minutes, watching her hum and make sounds at the cubs. His face showed disapproval. "This is not training, Cadet Collins," he said. "No, sir," Amy agreed. "You have 2 weeks left. Your cubs cannot follow a single command." "That is true, sir. Do you plan to fail?" Amy thought about that question. "I plan to keep trying my way, sir. If I fail, at least I will know I tried." Paul Vance made a sound of disgust and walked away. Amy heard him talking to Commandant Vrel later that day. He wanted Amy removed from the program immediately. He said she was wasting everyone's time, but Commandant Vrel said no. The Commandant had been watching the security recordings of Amy's sessions. She wanted to see what would happen. By week 4, something incredible started to occur. The cubs began responding to Amy's sounds. When she hummed the calm sound, Scout would relax. When she made the protective rumble, the biggest cub would stop being aggressive. When she used the clever one's questioning tone, it would pay attention. They were learning her language just as she had learned theirs. Amy started spending more time at the cage. She would arrive early in the morning before classes and stay late into the evening. She brought homework and sat outside the cage while she studied. Sometimes she talked to the cubs about what she was learning, even though they could not understand her words. "Today we learned about fleet tactics," she would say. "It is pretty boring, honestly. A lot of math about trajectories and fuel consumption." Scout would make its questioning sound, and Amy would hum back reassuringly. The other cubs started approaching the front of the cage too, not as close as Scout, but closer than before. They stopped seeing Amy as a threat. She was just part of their environment now, a strange creature that made sounds and ate food and never hurt them. One evening during week 4, Amy was sitting closer to the cage than usual. Her back hurt from a training exercise and she was too tired to sit up straight. She leaned back against the cage bars, separated from the cubs by just a few inches of space. She felt something warm press against her back. Amy froze. Very slowly she turned her head to look. Scout had moved right up to the bars and was pressing its side against them, as close to Amy as the cage allowed. The cub was choosing to be near her. Amy's eyes filled with tears. She reached back slowly and placed her hand against the bars. Scout did not move away. For several minutes they sat like that, separated by metal but connected by something neither of them had words for. Trust. The next day, Amy brought a puzzle toy she had made from spare parts. It was a simple box with a latch that needed to be opened in a specific way. She pushed it through the bars of the cage and backed away. The clever cub approached it first. It sniffed the box, then started testing it with its paws. Within 10 minutes, the cub had figured out the latch and opened the box. Inside was a treat Amy had saved from her breakfast. The clever cub ate half the treat, then pushed the box toward the others. They each took a small piece, sharing the reward. Amy made more puzzles. Each one was a little harder than the last. The cubs loved them. Even the protective one, who usually stayed alert and watchful, would take turns trying to solve the puzzles. Amy realized something important. The cubs were not stupid animals that needed to be broken. They were intelligent beings that needed to be engaged. During week 5, Amy started doing exercises near the cage. She would run in place, do push-ups, practice her combat moves. The cubs watched her with intense interest. Sometimes they would mimic her movements inside the cage, jumping and running in similar patterns. One day, Amy tried something new. She started a running pattern, calling out sounds as she moved. Scout's questioning sound when she started. The quick ones chirp when she turned. The protective ones rumble when she stopped. The cubs went crazy with excitement. They ran around their cage making those same sounds like they were running with her even though they were trapped. Amy felt her chest tighten. These creatures wanted to move, to play, to be part of something. Instead, they were chained and shocked and beaten by cadets who saw them as obstacles to overcome. Paul Vance came by again at the end of week 5. He looked at Amy, then at the cubs, then back at Amy. "You have 1 week left," he said. "Your trial is scheduled for the final day. You will fail." "Maybe, sir," Amy said. "I have filed a report recommending your immediate dismissal." He continued. "The commandant has denied it. I do not know why she wastes resources on you." He walked away. Amy looked at Scout, who had come to the front of the cage as soon as Paul Vance appeared. "1 week," Amy said quietly. "I guess we will find out if this works." Scout made its questioning sound. Amy hummed back, low and steady. The sound that meant everything would be okay. She hoped she was telling the truth. The day of the trial arrived too quickly. Amy barely slept the night before. She kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. The cubs had never been outside their cage, not since the trials began. They had never worked with her in an open space. She had no shock collar, no way to force them to obey if they refused. All she had was 6 weeks of sitting outside a cage, making sounds and hoping they understood. The trial would take place in the main combat arena, a huge space with obstacles, walls, and tactical challenges. Each cadet would have to guide their 5 cubs through a series of tests. The cubs needed to split into groups, hold positions, navigate obstacles, and respond to commands under pressure. 43 cadets remained from the original 300. The rest had either failed earlier tests or been eliminated during their attempts to train the Karvesh cubs. Amy was scheduled to go last. She sat in the observation area and watched the other cadets fail, one after another. The pattern was always the same. The cadet would enter the arena with their 5 cubs on shock collars and leashes. The cadet would give commands. The cubs would either refuse or fight back. Some cadets got the cubs to move through the obstacles, but only by shocking them repeatedly. The cubs screamed and struggled, terrified and in pain. 3 cadets got hurt badly enough to need medical attention. 1 cub died during a trial when it fought back too hard, and a cadet used a pain stick on its highest setting. The cub collapsed and did not get up. Amy felt sick watching it. She wanted to leave, but she could not. She had to see what she was up against. By the time they called her name, the other cubs were exhausted and traumatized. Amy walked past the cages where they were held. Some cubs were unconscious. Others pressed against the back walls of their cages, eyes wide with terror. Her 5 cubs were in the last cage. They huddled together, the protective one standing in front of the others. They looked scared but alert. When Scout saw Amy, its ears lifted slightly. Paul Vance stood by the cage door holding shock collars. "Put these on them before you enter the arena," he said. "No thank you, sir," Amy replied. "It is required equipment. The rules say cadets must have the option to use control devices. They do not say we must use them." Paul Vance's jaw tightened. "You are making a mistake." "That is my choice to make, sir." He stepped aside. Amy opened the cage door slowly. The cubs backed up except for Scout. The smallest cub took 1 step forward, then stopped. Amy knelt down and hummed. Scout's questioning sound, the one that asked if things were safe. Then she stood and began walking toward the arena entrance. She did not look back. She did not call to them. She just walked. She heard the soft sound of paws on the floor behind her. Scout was following, then another set of paws, and another. By the time Amy reached the arena entrance, all 5 cubs were walking behind her. No collars, no leashes, just following because they chose to. The observation area went quiet. Every instructor, every cadet, every staff member stopped what they were doing to watch. Amy entered the arena. It was huge, easily 100 yards across. Obstacles were scattered throughout. Walls to climb, gaps to jump, zones marked for tactical positions. At the far end, targets waited for the final challenge. Amy walked to the center and sat down. The cubs gathered around her, nervous and uncertain. They had never been in a space this large. The protective one stayed close, rumbling low warnings. The quick one darted back and forth, checking for threats. Scout pressed against Amy's leg. She needed them to calm down first. Amy began to hum, mixing all their sounds together. Scout's questioning tone. The protective one's rumble. The quick one's chirp. The clever one's varying pitches. And the last cub, the one Amy thought of as steady because it never panicked, had a low, continuous sound that meant everything was okay. The cubs relaxed. Not completely, but enough. Amy stood up and looked at the course ahead. The first challenge required splitting the cubs into 2 groups. 3 needed to go left around an obstacle, 2 needed to go right. Amy started moving toward the left path. She hummed the sounds of Scout, the clever one, and Steady. Those 3 cubs perked up. When Amy turned left, they followed. The protective one and the quick one stayed where they were, confused. Amy stopped and turned to face them. She hummed their sounds, then pointed right. The protective one understood immediately. It had been watching Amy for 6 weeks. It knew what she wanted. The protective one moved right, and the quick one followed. The observation area exploded with whispers. The cubs had split without collars, without pain, without force. Amy guided her group through the left path while the protective one led its group through the right path. She kept humming, using sound to tell them when to move and when to wait. When both groups reached the meeting point on the other side, Amy hummed the call-together sound, a mix of all their voices. The cubs reunited, pressing against each other briefly before focusing on Amy again. The second challenge was harder. The cubs needed to climb a series of platforms and cross a narrow beam. Amy went first, showing them the path. Scout followed immediately, trusting Amy completely. The clever one came next, figuring out the angles quickly. Steady moved slowly but surely. The quick one practically flew across, jumping from platform to platform. But the protective one hesitated. It was the biggest cub and the beam looked too narrow. It rumbled in warning, the sound that meant danger. Amy climbed back down and stood next to the protective one. She pressed her hand against its head, humming low and calm. Then she climbed up again and crossed the beam, showing that it was safe. The protective one watched, then made a decision. It climbed up and crossed, moving carefully but without fear. The third challenge required the cubs to hold positions while Amy moved away. This was the hardest part. The cubs did not like being separated from her. When Amy walked toward the marked zones, all 5 cubs tried to follow. She stopped and hummed the stay sound, a long, low tone she had practiced with them through the cage bars. Scout sat immediately. The clever one sat. Steady sat. The quick one sat after a moment of hesitation. The protective one did not sit. It walked toward Amy, rumbling concern. It did not want her to face danger alone. Amy knelt down and put both hands on the protective one's head. She hummed directly to it, mixing the stay sound with reassurance. The protective one understood. It was not abandoning her. It was trusting her. The protective one walked back and sat with the others. Amy moved through the tactical challenge alone, touching each marked point. The cubs stayed where she left them. Every cadet in the observation area stood up to see better. Cubs never stayed. They always followed or ran away. But these 5 cubs sat and waited, watching Amy with focused attention. When she returned, they rushed to her, making happy sounds Amy had never heard before. They were relieved. They had done what she asked, and she had come back. The final challenge was the most difficult. The cubs needed to navigate an obstacle course together, while Amy guided them from a distance. She could not touch them or walk with them. She could only use commands. Amy climbed onto an observation platform that overlooked the course. She took a breath and began to hum, Scout's questioning sound for attention, the quick one's chirp for movement, the protective one's rumble for caution, the clever one's varying tones for problem-solving, Steady's continuous sound for confidence. The cubs moved. They worked together, following the sounds Amy made. When they reached a wall, the clever one found the way around. When they came to a jump, the quick one went first to show it was safe. When something looked dangerous, the protective one went first to check. Scout kept them together, and Steady kept them calm. They completed the course in less time than any other group that day. When they finished, the cubs ran back to Amy as she climbed down from the platform. They surrounded her, making sounds of excitement and relief. Amy knelt among them and they pressed close, seeking contact and comfort. The arena was completely silent for 10 full seconds. Then Commandant Vrel began to walk down from the observation deck. Her blue feathers ruffled in what might have been surprise or approval. She stopped in front of Amy. "Explain what you did here," she commanded. Amy looked at the Commandant, then at the cubs around her, then back at the Commandant. "I did not train them, sir. I listened to them. I learned how they communicate. I showed them respect. They chose to work with me because I treated them like intelligent beings, not like animals to be broken. You used no control devices. No, sir. You did not use dominance tactics. No, sir." Commandant Vrel looked at the cubs, who watched her warily but did not attack or run. "In 300 years of this trial, no one has ever achieved what you just did. You completed the course faster and with less stress to the animals than any cadet on record." "Thank you, sir," Amy said. "This changes everything," the Commandant said quietly. The Academy erupted into chaos after Amy's trial. Paul Vance filed an official complaint within an hour, claiming Amy had cheated somehow. He demanded an investigation into whether she had used illegal technology or telepathic enhancement. Other instructors joined him, arguing that Amy's method could not be replicated and therefore should not count as a valid training approach. But Commandant Vrel shut down the complaints immediately. She ordered a full review of everything that had happened during the 6 weeks. Scientists, behavioral experts, and military strategists were brought in to study the recordings of Amy and her cubs. Amy was not allowed to leave the station during the review. She spent her days in a small conference room, answering endless questions. What exactly had she done? Why did she think it worked? Could she teach this method to others? The 5 cubs were taken to a special facility for observation. Amy was allowed to visit them once per day. Each time she arrived, the cubs would rush to the barrier separating them, making their sounds of greeting. Scout always came first. On the 3rd day of the review, a specialist in alien psychology named Dr. Helen Grant sat down across from Amy. She was human, one of only a dozen humans working at the Academy as civilian staff. "I have watched the recordings 20 times, Dr. Grant said. What you did should not have been possible." "Why not?" Amy asked. "Because the Karvesh are supposed to be untrainable without dominance methods. That is what 300 years of data tells us." "Maybe the data was wrong," Amy suggested. Dr. Grant smiled slightly. "That is what I am beginning to think. Tell me, did you study animal behavior back on Earth?" "No, I studied military tactics and leadership." "Then where did you learn to communicate with them?" Amy thought about that question. "I just watched them. I noticed they made different sounds at different times. I started trying to understand what those sounds meant. Once I understood, I could respond." "But why did you decide to watch them in the first place?" Every other cadet tried to force compliance immediately. "Because they looked scared," Amy said simply. "And hurting scared things did not seem like the right way to gain their cooperation." Dr. Grant wrote something down. "You saw them as people, not tools." "Yes, I guess so." The review took 2 weeks. During that time, Amy learned that she had become famous across the Allied worlds. News of what happened had spread quickly. Some praised her approach. Others condemned it as weakness. Political debates raged about whether military training should include compassion or if that was a dangerous sentiment in warfare. Amy tried to ignore all of it. She just wanted to know if she had passed the trial. Finally, Commandant Vrel summoned her to a private meeting. The Commandant's office was large and decorated with weapons from a dozen different worlds. Vrel sat behind her desk, her blue feathers smooth and controlled. "The review is complete," Vrel said. "Sit down, Cadet Collins." Amy sat. Her heart pounded in her chest. "The findings are disturbing," Vrel continued. "Not about you, but about us. The experts have concluded that the Karvesh are being driven insane by our training methods. Their telepathic bonds, which connect them to their podmates, are being shattered by dominance-based approaches. They fight back not because they are savage, but because they are being tortured." Amy felt her stomach turn. "For how long?" "Since we began this trial. 300 years, and no one noticed." "No one asked," Vrel said bitterly. "We assumed we knew what we were doing. We assumed force was the only language they understood. Your approach proved us wrong. What happens now?" Amy asked. "Several things. First, you passed the trial. Your score is the highest in Academy history. Second, the Karvesh trial is suspended immediately. We will not torture any more cubs. Third, we are redesigning our entire training program based on your methods." Amy nodded, taking it all in. And the cubs, my 5? That is complicated. There is someone here who wants to meet you. She arrived yesterday from the Karvesh homeworld. Vrel pressed a button on her desk. The door opened and a creature entered that made Amy catch her breath. It was a fully grown Karvesh, easily 3 times the size of the cubs. Its fur was silver with black stripes, and its green eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakable. This is Ambassador Kresh, Vrel said. She speaks for the Karvesh people. A translation device on Kresh's collar activated. When she opened her mouth, clicks and growls came out, but the device turned them into words. I have watched the recordings of your trial, Amy Collins. I have watched many recordings of many trials over many years. You are the first to treat our cubs with respect. I am sorry, Amy said immediately. I did not know this trial was hurting them so badly. I should have done something sooner. You could not have known, Kresh replied. We have sent our cubs to this academy for generations because the treaty requires it. We have lost so many to your brutal methods. We believed it was the cost of alliance. We believed you could not change. But you can change, Amy said. I changed. Yes, and now we see that others can change too if they choose to. Kresh moved closer to Amy. The 5 cubs you worked with have chosen you as podmother. This is the highest honor among my people. You are now part of their family bond. Amy felt tears in her eyes. I do not deserve that honor. They disagree. And so do I. You questioned the system when it would have been easier to follow it. You chose compassion when violence was expected. You listened when everyone else commanded. Over the next month, everything changed at the academy. The Karvesh trial was permanently ended. A new program was created based on Amy's approach, focusing on communication and partnership rather than dominance. Instructors who refused to adapt were transferred to other positions. Paul Vance was one of them. Before he left, he came to see Amy one last time. His face was as expressionless as always, but something in his eyes looked different. I have been teaching the same way for 20 years, he said. I believed I was teaching strength. I was teaching cruelty. You showed me I was wrong. Anyone could have done what I did, Amy replied. No. Most people do not question what they are taught. They follow orders and repeat patterns. You thought for yourself. That is rare. He left without saying goodbye. Amy never saw him again. The biggest change came when other species started reviewing their own training programs. If the dominance method was wrong for the Karvesh, what other partnerships had been destroyed through ignorance? 7 different species requested that Amy visit their worlds to evaluate their military training. The Galactic Council created a new position called Interspecies Communication Specialist, and Amy was offered the first placement. But that would come later. For now, Amy was still a cadet with studies to complete. She attended classes, ran combat drills, and studied tactical theory. The difference was that she now attended with 5 Karvesh cubs following her everywhere. It was unprecedented, but Commandant Vrel allowed it. Scout stayed closest to Amy during classes, often sleeping under her desk. The protective one stood guard outside her room at night. The clever one helped her solve tactical problems by offering a different perspective. The quick one ran messenger tasks between Amy and her instructors. Steady kept everyone calm when stress levels ran high. They were not pets. They were not servants. They were partners and friends. Other cadets started approaching Amy for advice. They wanted to know how to communicate with their own assigned species. They wanted to learn her methods. Amy taught anyone who asked, always emphasizing the same principle. Assume intelligence, assume purpose, and listen before you act. 6 months after the trial, Amy graduated at the top of her class. The ceremony was held in the main hall with representatives from 47 worlds attending. When Amy's name was called, she walked across the stage with 5 Karvesh by her side. It was the first time in Academy history that any creature besides a cadet had participated in graduation. Ambassador Kresh gave a speech that was broadcast across the allied worlds. Today we honor Amy Collins, who showed us that true strength comes from understanding, not control. She did not break our cubs. She partnered with them. This is the way forward for all our species. After the ceremony, Amy was approached by dozens of military leaders offering positions in elite units. She turned them all down. Instead, she accepted the position with the new Interspecies Communication Corps. Her mission was to travel to allied worlds and learn how other species actually thought and communicated. rather than how dominant cultures assumed they did. Her first assignment would be to the Kirin worlds, where insectoid hive minds had been considered unintelligent for decades. Amy had 6 weeks to prepare before departure. She spent that time studying everything known about the Kirin, knowing that most of it was probably wrong. Scout stayed by her side as she read, occasionally making soft, questioning sounds. Amy would hum back reassuringly, a simple conversation that meant everything was all right. She had listened when no one else would, and in doing so, she had changed everything. The Kirin worlds were nothing like Amy expected. She had studied files that described the species as simple hive insects, incapable of individual thought. The files said they communicated through pheromones and simple behaviors. The files said they could not be reasoned with. The files were completely wrong. Amy spent the first week just watching. The Kirin built structures that were architectural marvels, shifting and adapting to environmental changes. They created art from colored minerals, patterns that changed meaning based on the angle of light. They showed grief when one of their hive members died, gathering around the body in what could only be described as a funeral ceremony. None of this was in the official reports. Amy brought her 5 Karvesh with her, as always. The Kirin were fascinated by them. Scout, being the most curious, approached the Kirin workers without fear. The insects would stop their tasks and observe Scout carefully, antennae waving in complex patterns. One day, Amy noticed that Scout responded to the antenna movements. The cub would tilt its head in specific ways, almost like it was answering questions. Amy started recording the interactions, comparing Scout's movements to the Kirin's antenna patterns. She discovered something remarkable. The Kirin were not just using pheromones. They were using visual signals through their antenna movements. Each pattern meant something different. The problem was that most species could not process visual information that quickly, so they missed the communication entirely. Amy could not process it either. But she had cameras that could slow down the movements and break them into understandable patterns. Within a month, she had created a basic translation system. It was rough and incomplete, but it worked. The first time Amy communicated with a Kirin elder, the entire hive stopped working to witness it. Amy used a holographic display to show antenna patterns, moving them slowly enough that the Kirin could understand. She introduced herself and explained why she had come. The Kirin elder responded with patterns so fast they blurred. Amy's translation system worked to break them down. The message was clear. Finally, someone sees us. The Kirin had been trying to communicate for decades. They had sent diplomatic signals, created visual messages, even built structures that spelled out words in multiple languages. But everyone assumed they were just insects following instinct. No one had bothered to look closely. Amy spent 4 months with the Kirin. By the time she left, she had helped establish the first true dialogue between the Kirin and the Galactic Council. The insectoid hive minds were not unintelligent. They were brilliant in ways most species had never considered. Her second assignment was to the Dreth homeworld. The Dreth communicated through color changes in their skin, a language so complex and rapid that standard translators could not keep up. Previous diplomats had tried to make the Dreth use audio speech, which the Dreth found painful and limiting. Amy took a different approach. She brought artists and computer programmers instead of diplomats. Together, they studied the color patterns for 3 months, identifying thousands of distinct shades and combinations. Each color shift had meaning. Each pattern told a story. The team created a new translation system based on chromatic algorithms. It was not perfect, but it allowed real-time communication for the first time in 70 years. The Dreth, who had been considering leaving the Alliance, chose to stay. They said it was the first time anyone had tried to speak their language instead of forcing them to speak someone else's. With each assignment, Amy's reputation grew. She became known as the person who could bridge communication gaps that others considered impossible, but she always deflected praise and credit. She said the same thing every time. I just listen. The species I work with do all the hard work of teaching me. Her 5 Karvesh remained with her through every assignment. Scout, now fully grown, served as her constant companion and often acted as an intermediary with other species. The protective one, who Amy eventually named Guardian, kept her safe in dangerous situations. The clever one helped solve communication puzzles. The quick one scouted new environments. Steady kept everyone calm during stressful negotiations. They were not just her team. They were her family. After 3 years of assignments, Amy was invited back to the academy to train the next generation of interspecies communication specialists. The program had grown from 1 person to a full department with 30 cadets. Amy spent 6 months teaching them everything she had learned. The lessons were simple but profound. Assume the species you are working with is intelligent, even if you do not understand their intelligence yet. Assume their behaviors have purpose, even if that purpose is not obvious. Watch before you act. Listen before you speak. Respect before you demand. One young cadet, a human named Lisa Cole, asked a question that stuck with Amy. What do you do when you cannot understand a species at all? When nothing works? Amy thought about that for a long moment. You keep trying. You admit you do not know. You ask for help. The worst thing you can do is assume understanding when you have none. It is better to say I do not understand you yet than to pretend you do and cause harm. During her time at the academy, Amy also helped redesign the entire curriculum. Combat training now included modules on communication and cultural awareness. Tactical courses emphasize partnership over dominance. Even the weapons training program was changed to focus on defensive capabilities rather than pure offensive power. Not everyone agreed with the changes. Some instructors and military leaders argued that Amy was making soldiers too soft, too hesitant. They said that kindness had no place in warfare, but the results spoke for themselves. Graduates from the new program performed better in joint operations with alien forces. They built stronger alliances. They resolved conflicts faster. Most importantly, they lost fewer people in combat situations because they understood their allies and could coordinate effectively. After her teaching assignment ended, Amy returned to fieldwork. But she no longer traveled alone. She now led a team of 12 specialists, each trained in her methods. They tackled the most difficult communication challenges in known space. One of their biggest successes came with the Vorath, a species that had been hostile to the Alliance for 200 years. The Vorath were traders and merchants, but they had been excluded from major trade routes because other species found them aggressive and untrustworthy. Amy's team spent 8 months studying Vorath culture. They discovered that the Vorath communicated value and intent through elaborate gift-giving rituals. What other species saw as aggression was actually the Vorath testing whether potential partners were serious about negotiations. A Vorath who did not push back was seen as weak or disinterested. Once the team understood this, they taught Alliance diplomats how to engage properly with Vorath culture. Within a year, the Vorath signed their first major trade agreement in 2 centuries. The Alliance gained access to resources and technologies they had been lacking. The Vorath gained the respect and partnership they had been seeking. 5 years after her graduation, Amy was invited to speak at the Academy's annual symposium. Every seat in the main hall was filled. Cadets from 63 species attended, along with instructors, diplomats, and military leaders from across the Alliance. Amy stood on the stage with Scout beside her. The Karvesh was now 10 years old, fully mature and completely devoted to Amy. The other 4 Karvesh waited in the wings, alert and protective as always. I am not special, Amy began. The audience leaned forward to hear her. I am not uniquely talented. I do not have abilities that others lack. What I did anyone could have done. I simply chose to listen when it would have been easier to command. She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Every species in this room has something to teach us. Every culture has wisdom we do not possess. Every creature we meet has intelligence, even if we do not recognize it at first. Our job is not to force the universe to communicate in our language. Our job is to learn as many languages as we can. Amy talked about her failures, the times she made assumptions and caused offense. She talked about the species she still did not understand despite years of trying. She talked about the ongoing work of learning to see beyond her own perspective. The instructors asked why the cubs followed me, she said, gesturing to Scout. They wanted to know my secret technique. They expected some special human advantage, but there was no secret. I did not train them. I listened to them. I learned their language. I showed them respect. They chose to work with me because I treated them as equals, not as tools. She looked at Scout, who made a soft rumbling sound. Partnership is stronger than control. Understanding is more powerful than dominance. And the bravest thing a leader can do is admit when they do not know something and ask for help. The speech was recorded and distributed across the Allied worlds. It became required viewing for every command school, every diplomatic academy, every military training program, not because it was revolutionary, but because it was true. Amy Collins never became an admiral. She never commanded fleets or negotiated galactic treaties at the highest levels. She never sought fame or power, but she changed the way billions of beings thought about cooperation, communication, and what it meant to be strong. 20 years after her graduation, the Galactic Council created a new,